Hello and welcome to Trade Routes at PCB. This is your update on international trade for March 21st, 2025. My name is Gina Cruz and I'm your host for today. We're going to be studying or talking about customs valuation, and it is only one of the many complex aspects of importing that you have to consider. Due to the fluctuating tariff situation, the accuracy of your valuation has never been more important. With each episode of Trade Routes, we will be bringing in expert guests who can speak to the topics such as this. Today, I'm joined by the two leading minds in the world of international trade, Misty Gibbins, who is our Senior Trade Advisor in U.S. operations, and Gloria Terhaar, who is our Regulatory Analyst for Canadian operations. So, Misty, Gloria, thank you for joining us today for Trade Routes.
Hello. Hi, thank you for having us.
Thank you for being here. We've got a lot to conquer today. So our goal for today is to provide our viewers with details regarding customs valuation and provide useful insight. Let's get started with some of the questions we've been receiving to our hotline, which for listeners is 888-908-6638, or email us at tariffquestions@pcbglobaltrade.com. So speakers, tell me, why is proper valuation so important, especially in this current tariff climate?
Well, it really is important, as most customs duties are calculated on the entered value of your shipment. The entered value is derived from your invoice value with certain deductions for duties, taxes, and CBP fees, brokerage, and transportation charges.
To add to what Misty says, she's using the term entered value. That's the U.S. term for the value that is used to determine, as she said, your duties and taxes. In Canada, that's the value for duty amount. And if you aren't taking all of your applicable deductions or making any additions to the value for duty that you need to make, you could be potentially paying the wrong amount of duties and taxes. And ultimately, if you get audited for that, that can result in further penalties and even interest on amounts that were unpaid. In relation to surtaxes, if you are not taking all of the deductions that are available to you, you could be paying more surtax than you have to.
And that can add up quite drastically. One of the main questions we're being asked is, which costs should and should not be included in the value for customs? Is there an easy answer for this?
Not really.
No, we both agree on that one.
CBP examines valuation on a case-by-case basis, as it all depends on the circumstances of the sale and what agreements were made between the U.S. buyer and the foreign seller. What Incoterms were involved in the sale. Often, when correctly used, the Incoterm will indicate which party is responsible for charges such as freight, customs charges, and duties. And this can help us determine what charges are actually included in that invoice value.
Gloria, anything on the Canadian side that's different?
Not really. Valuation is an international agreement through the World Trade Organization, of which Canada, the US, and 164 other countries are members. So the basis of valuation between our countries is the same.
Okay. But what if the goods aren't sold prior to entering the United States, or, for instance, a pick and pack situation?
If there's no sale at the time of shipment to the US, you cannot use transaction value. You would have to then move on to use the remaining methods of valuation in the order that they appear in the regulations. Transaction value of identical merchandise, where a sale has taken place in the same trade lane, say Canada to the US, at approximately the same time frame. If there are no sales of identical merchandise, you would have to move on to similar merchandise, and then deductive and computed values. And finally, the fallback method. The further down the valuation tree you go, the more complicated the valuation becomes.
Same in Canada?
It is. And just to add a little bit to what Misty said, that last method of valuation, the fallback method, it's formally known as the residual basis of appraisal method of valuation. And it's basically a flexible application of all of the previous methods of valuation that Misty named. So if you've ruled out the use of all of those other methods of valuation and you think that one applies to your situation, I highly recommend that you get a customs ruling so that you can ensure customs authorities agree with your value determination and you don't get any surprises later on.
So you can't just pick a number out of the hat and say, this is what we think it is. There has to be a whole mathematical equation that comes up with the value.
Yes, those methods of valuation, they're laid out in order and they must be applied in order. So you can't just pick and say, oh, I'm going to use identical value because I feel like it today. You have to start with the transaction method evaluation and then cross them out saying they don't apply to my situation. What's the next one? What's the next one? Which is why valuation can be so complicated when you don't have a straight sale between a buyer and seller.
Great for my next question. What about if you're shipping to Canadian goods to a U.S. warehouse? And then my next question after that, what about samples? So let's go with the first one. What if you're just transfer goods from a Canadian company to a U.S. warehouse? What would you use for valuation then?
Well, if the Canadian company is shipping to their U.S. warehouse, where that would be considered a sale or a transfer between related parties. So your transaction value would not be the proper way to value the goods. You may need to base your valuation on transfer pricing methodology, which would include a transfer pricing study. CBP's transfer pricing requirements are somewhat different than the IRS transfer pricing requirements in that CBP will require an examination of the circumstances of sale, where the transfer price must be adequate to ensure recovery of all your costs plus profit, equivalent to the firm's overall profit over a representative period of time.
Gloria, how about U.S. companies sending goods up to Canada prior to any more of these tariff decisions just to hold them? What would their pricing be?
Again, they wouldn't have a sale. They would have to look at the other methods of valuation. And if they're transferring them between their own warehouses, again, you've got the issue of related parties. So they'd have to be able to prove that that relationship isn't influencing the pricing. And so they have to do a pretty in-depth study. Again, a customs ruling is something that can be really valuable in those situations.
Okay. What about samples? How do I value those?
So samples can be somewhat tricky. People think they're really easy because they're sending them across the border. There's no value. So they say, oh, there's no value. We tell them that you can't have no value. Customs does not believe in $0. And they say, just put $1 on it. That's not valid. Again, under the World Trade Organization Customs Valuation Agreement, it's prohibited to use arbitrary or fictitious values. So when someone's saying, just put $1 on it, that's pretty arbitrary or fictitious.
You can get yourself in some hot water with that.
Yeah, you're undervaluing the goods.
Right.
And even in the case of samples, it's quite likely that duties or taxes need to be paid. And the government, they want the correct amount of duties and taxes that they're supposed to get. Misty, in one of the earlier answers, laid out the methods of valuation. Typically, a sample falls into the identical goods method, where the value of the goods is basically what the good would normally be sold at if a sale was taking place to the same party.
And that's the same on the U.S. side.
And even if you're sending samples with that into the U.S. with a Section 321, you still have to have correct value, correct?
Correct. You have to value it correctly. You can't undervalue it in order to take advantage of that T86 or Section 321 rule. You have to value it as to what the goods would be normally sold at.
I think we can conclude that you can't just pick a random number, and valuation can be very tricky. You've got to do some diving research into that before you just put a number on paper. How do we support clients in getting to that valuation for reporting?
Well, we often consult our customers through our trade advisory services department at Pacific Customs Brokers, and they would have to provide us the circumstances of the sale or the circumstances of their shipment if it's not sold, and we would go through the different methods of valuation until we found one that actually fit their circumstance. We would always recommend a ruling, because it's better to have a ruling so you have some assurance that you are filing these goods and declaring your value as CBP wants, or CBP or CBSA dictates that it should be declared.
So a ruling on both sides if you're crossing back and forth with the same product.
Definitely, both countries have that ruling program where you can ask customs how your goods should be declared. You can also ask them on tariff classification. There's other and trade agreements. There's other items that a ruling can be written for, but it's always good to have that assurance that you are declaring them according to the U.S. or Canadian customs.
And it looks good to customs that you're asking questions and getting their decisions.
Yeah, it does. It shows that you're showing reasonable care and responsibility for your U.S. imports, for sure.
Well, thank you for joining me today for this discussion on international trade. It was very informative, and I look forward to your updates in the days and months to come. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to us at tariffquestions@pcbglobaltrade.com. They could be answered here next time. We are holding a webinar specifically on valuation on the 27th of March. Go to pcbglobaltrade.com and look for the Learning Center link. As always, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter, follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook so you don't miss any future updates. Please hit that like and subscribe button below. This is Gina Cruz. Until next time.